Welcome, everyone. This is the Son to Father Virtual Survey and Data Entry Overview webinar. This webinar was developed as a response to COVID-19 and the need for flexibility to host Son to a Father groups virtually when needed. So this is just a reminder that nothing has changed in terms of in-person Son to a Father groups. So anytime you run an in-person meeting, all of your data collection processes will remain the same as they were when you were trained with Chris and Cole. So today we'll just be talking about some changes to the group forms. You can click through those. As well as participant forms. So the long and the short of it is that group forms are essentially staying the same for virtual sessions. We'll go through the details of that as we proceed through this webinar. But the largest differences will be to the participant forms, so to the demographic forms and to the post survey. These will be different for virtual sessions in that they will be occurring online rather than in pen and paper format. So let's start first with those group forms. So if you recall, a brief refresher of what the group section of REDCap looks like. All of the information on groups can be found in the record status dashboard for ARM1. If this doesn't look familiar, you'll probably want to do a refresher course on the first Son to a Father webinar before continuing with this training. As you can see here, this contains all of the information that's collected at the level of the group. Sometimes this group might be 8 young men or more, and at other sites you might have a group of only 1 young man who's going through the curriculum solely with you. But nevertheless, each is its own group. And so you can see here a list of the broad kind of overview of instruments where all those existing groups data can be found. And on the left, you see the list of names of the groups that you've created records for. So for each group, we have one instrument, the first one about group information, which is just sort of general information when you start a group. And to the right of that, you'll see an instrument for each of the Son to a Father sessions, and that represents each of the separate fidelity logs that you'll fill out for that particular group. So in order to, as we trained you last time, complete each fidelity log, you will click either on the record ID to the left of the group you want to enter data for, or you can click directly on the bubble for the fidelity log that you want to enter information for. And again, all of this can be found in the previous training on data entry. This is just a quick refresher. So in the next slide, we have just images of what exactly these group forms are. Again, just as a refresher, this would be the example of a completed group attendance form, after you had one session with a group of 3 young men. So you can see here we have their names, if they've completed the demographic form, their ID numbers, whether or not they participated in supplemental services, case management, or if it's not applicable, they've not been part of either. And then you mark where they've attended each session that they've attended. And you will use this form exactly as you have been using it. Nothing will change about this process. So you will still need to have a printed copy of this form to complete for each group. So plan to use either the printed copies you got during the January training, or plan your printing trips to your office or Office Depot accordingly. In the next slide, we have an example of a fidelity log. This is for the first session, the Fathers Are Superheroes session. As a reminder, again, nothing will change about this particular form. You will still be completing this on pen and paper, and you will still need to use those printed copies of the fidelity forms to complete for each group. If you wish, if you don't want to use the pen and paper format, you may choose to enter your fidelity form information directly into REDCap. But if you do this, make sure that you go into REDCap immediately after each session so that you can remember the details of the session for this data collection. So that's it for the group forms, but now we're moving on to the participant forms, which is really where all the change has happened for our virtual sessions. You can see here we have our original forms that should look familiar from your printed copies. If you remember, the plan was to have participants complete both of these forms in person. You were to have the new participants complete the demographic questionnaire on the left during their first session, and have all participants fill out the session evaluation forms on the right after each session. And then you were to enter those forms into REDCap. So now we are moving to new virtual forms for those sessions that are offered virtually. Just as a repeat, for sessions you offer in person, please still complete the form the pen and pencil format and then enter into REDCap. But this is a process strictly for when you meet virtually. So instead of printing out, please.
Sorry.
Instead of printing out copies of the demographic forms and the surveys, you will send participants a link to each of these at a specific time. And each site will have their own links to these forms, so you don't have to worry that your data might get mixed with another site's. You have your own specific data and your own specific links. And you will be responsible for inputting the data that participants put into these forms into REDCap, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So the first form we're going to be talking about is the demographic form. So you'll send each new participant a link to fill out the demographic form at the beginning of their first session. So it should only be filled out once for each participant. And all of the questions in this virtual form that you have the link to are the same as those on the paper form. As you can see here, one difference is that they have to fill out their own participant ID. So you'll still be using the process you were taught previously for assigning IDs, and you can see the reference guide for more details on that. But now you will need to actually give those ID numbers to the young men to put into their forms, because this is exactly as they will see it. So the first question they will be asked is what their ID is. So it's important that they get that right so that you can enter the correct participant's information into the correct ID in REDCap. So since you will be keeping track of their IDs, you need to make sure that participants know their ID when they're completing their demographic form. So as you go to send out that demographic form for new participants, the beginning of their first session, we recommend that you also send them their ID individually when you ask them to take a survey, and likely through a chat feature, either if you're using Zoom, Google Hangouts, Teams, Facebook, all of these should have individual messaging, direct messaging features where you can share that information just with them. The next form will be the survey form. So this is the other major form that you will have a separate link to. And this form is completed by all participants at the end of each session. So this, just as you would with the paper forms, you know, usually you'd hand it out to the young men at the end when you're done chatting. Now you just send them the link instead through your chat feature in your virtual platform. And you can see here, again, the young men will have to know their individual participant ID. This will be a drop-down feature where they can select their ID. So you will need to tell each participant their ID individually at the end of your session through individual chats. So if your sessions are, again, held on Facebook, you need to go to you know, Sarah McGurr's direct message and send, you know, my ID number. So Sarah, your ID number is 3001, for example. And this is intended to protect participant privacy as well as the correctness of the data, so we can link the young men's outcomes over time, essentially. And you're going to need to ask your participants to use the honor system and only complete surveys under their participant ID. And you might need to explain to them why this is important, because this is the data that helps us know if the program is working and what we can do better. And if we don't know who's responding, then we can't do what we need to do with the data. The second question you see here is about the session. Now, you will also need to tell participants the number or name of the session you just covered so that they can select the correct one here. And you'll need this information to be accurate as well, so you can enter their survey response under the correct session in REDCap. The last important thing to note here is that if you cover more than one session's material in one meeting, you will need to take a break between the two sessions to have participants complete this survey, then proceed with the next session, and then have them complete a survey again at the end of that session's material, so that we can kind of track their progress and their growth through each particular session, regardless of the meeting time. So now let's jump into how you get the data from these specific forms that the young men will fill out online. How does that information get from the Google Forms into REDCap? Well, that's what we're about to talk about. So each site will get links to 2 Google Sheets where the information from their 2 surveys will live. Unfortunately, the technology is such that we cannot have the participants' information go directly into REDCap. Otherwise, we would do that. So instead, you will need to access these 2 Google Sheets to see your participants' feedback, such as what you might do better next time or what they want to learn more about, as well as for your data entry purposes into REDCap. So let's dive in to what they'll look like. So this is an example of one Google Sheet. So this particular Google Sheet is for the demographics form. So this tracks automatically when they complete their demographics survey, another row will populate in this form here, in this Excel sheet, with the information that they entered. So that means that each row represents one entry. And in the demographics form, each participant will only have one row, their own row, because they only fill out the demographics once. So for the session survey, this will be, oh, please go back. This is distinct from the session survey where each participant will have as many rows as sessions that they attend virtually. And we'll show you that when we get to that form. In each column, you can see in the white columns here, starting at D, is the timestamp. So that's when they completed this form. That's the only information that's gathered from them other than the information they input. You can see from there on, each of the columns correspond with the questions in the form. So starting with participant ID, then how old they are, then their race, ethnicity, then their current school situation. So they should be in the exact same order as the Google form, which should be in the exact same order as REDCap. Now the green columns you see on the left are questions that you will need to answer that will help your data entry in REDCap. So here you will enter which groups the participant is involved in, and if the participant is also receiving case management or supplemental services. And then in column A, the very first column, once you enter this data into REDCap, that's where you'll enter a date that you actually put it into REDCap to help with your quality assurance. We'll go over that a little bit later. So when you're ready to enter data, you'll want to have this, the Google Sheet open that you're wanting to enter, as well as REDCap. You'll want to be logged into the Son to a Father REDCap project. So on the next slide, we can see what arm 2 of the REDCap project looks like. This is the participant arm. So if we just, you can choose a participant you want to enter data for by clicking on the number to the left of their participant ID, or you can go directly into an instrument by clicking on one of the bubbles. Let's practice, let's think about what entering this data would actually look like for the demographics form. So as you recall, you would need to create a new record for new participants. And then you'd select the demographics instrument. So on the next slide, we have some screenshots of what that looks like. So once you create a new record, the window that's on the bottom will open up. And your first question will be entering the participant ID. So you'll look back to your Google Sheet on top. You'll say, okay, I'm entering row 2. So you may want to just highlight this whole row so that you can kind of follow it across, make sure that you're staying on the same row. But you'll enter the participant ID, the 3001, into the participant ID question in REDCap. Then you will want to enter which site you are responding for, and then how many groups that this participant is in. In order to answer this question, you can refer to the green columns above. And then you can report here which their primary group is, which would just be the group that they partake in the most sessions with. The date that this form was filled out, you will gather that information from the timestamp that will tell you, okay, they completed this form on the 14th of July, or I can't quite read what that says, on the 2nd of July. And then the final piece of information on screen here will be also from the green column about what other MyApp services they are involved with. So are they in supplemental services? Other than Son to a Father? Are they in case management, or none of the above? And this is the select all that apply question. So you can click as many as you want there. They might be in supplemental services and case management, or one or the other. So from there on, the form just continues so that you can kind of just read across the row, and the question should be in the same order from one system into the other. In the next slide, we have our third step, which is once you've completed your data entry in REDCap and you've saved, obviously we have to save. We know REDCap doesn't auto-save. Our third step is to mark the date that we entered the form into REDCap in the row that you entered. So we entered 3001 on July 3rd. So we've put that date in here. And then the last step is just sort of another optional step, but might help you keep track of data entry. So you might consider selecting that row that you've entered by clicking on the button here to the left of the row and clicking strike through so that it kind of just crosses it off. So you know, okay, I don't have to look at that one again. I've already put it in REDCap, it's done. Alternatively, you can select that row and you could change the color, the background color of the slides to gray, for example, to indicate that it's already been entered into REDCap. These are all just sort of optional steps to help you keep track of which ones you've entered or not. So a couple of tips for using these Excel sheets, these Google Sheets. You may notice that some of the entries might be cut off. So you can't read, you know, it says Black or African America. So to make the text kind of come down to the next line so that you can read the whole entry, you can just select, basically drag your mouse across and select the cells where this is a problem, and then you can click on wrap text, that little icon right here. And then it will display all of the selections. This is particularly a problem in the check all that apply questions because the responses here are just listed with only commas in between. So for this what is your race, ethnicity. You notice when they selected both Hispanic or Latinx or Spanish and white, that there's only a comma that separates these two different responses. However, you'll notice they are separate responses when you need to put them into REDCap. So it's important that you are able to see the whole entry. Otherwise, you might miss that last racial or ethnic identification of white. All right, so now let's look at the spreadsheet that looks very similar that will track participant survey responses for each session. So this is the one that this gathers the data from the form that they complete at the end of every session about that session. So you'll notice this looks very similar, but unlike the demographics spreadsheet, one participant will likely have multiple rows in the spreadsheet. This is because participants will fill out a survey for every session they attend. So if I, Sarah McGurr, have attended 5 sessions, ideally, if I've completed the form each time, I should have 5 rows in here. On the next page, we can see how this data is transitioned from the Excel Google Sheet into the REDCap system. So participants, when you get to this point of the survey responses, should already have a record in REDCap from filling out the demographics form. So you can either go to the record status dashboard or add or edit records to enter the post survey. So keep in mind that the session name will be the form that you fill out. So here for row 4 in our Excel sheet, we have an entry for the Fathers Are Superheroes session. So if we want to enter that into REDCap, we will find participant 3002 or whatever that row says, and we will click into the into that form that's associated. So once we open that form, we'll get the thing that's on the bottom right, and you will complete the which group was this session held with, and ideally you will have already completed that in your Google Sheet where there's a big 1 that you will say, okay, participant 3001 completed this particular session with this particular group, and then you'll just be able to transfer that information over to REDCap. And now if you will complete the next couple of questions using your participant attendance sheet. So the one where you have the check marks about if they attended or not. So you'll have record, did this participant attend the session? Yes. Did the participant complete a post survey for Fathers Are Superheroes? And if they have an entry in the Google Sheet, then yes, they have completed a post survey. And from there, you will enter the data. The questions should be in the same order as they are in the Excel Google Sheet. So you can see the first question is, I am more confident in my skills as a parent. And you can see that also in the REDCap form. I am more confident in my skills as a parent. And you would select no change here because that's the response for this participant. Now, if a participant attended a session but did not complete the post survey, you will do as you would if they didn't complete a post survey in the pen and paper format, which is you would just select no to the question, did they complete a post survey? And likewise, if your group held the session, but the participant did not attend, you still need to go into the system for that participant and mark them that they did not attend that session with that group. So, we're not quite done there, but similar to the demographics form, when you are done entering all of this data into REDCap and saving it, you'll enter the date into that first column in the Excel sheet that you entered the form, just so we can keep track of, and you can keep track of which ones you have and have not entered. And the last step is that optional one, which wherein you can select the row that you entered and either strike it through or change the background to gray, whatever you need to do to indicate that it's done, that you don't need to enter that because it's already been entered. So now that we've done a walkthrough with the screenshots, let's do a little bit of practice. Let's look at them live. We're going to pull up. Each of you should have received we'll pull up REDCap, and we will pull up our Google Sheets, which we have here. And each of you should have received a table like this. Here is included all of the links that you will need to do this virtual process. The first link is the actual demographics survey. So we won't be clicking on that today, but that is the link that you would send out to participants to take the demographics survey the first time they attend at the beginning of the session. The second box here is the demographic responses. This is your Google Sheet that you will look at to get the demographic data to put into REDCap. The third box is the participant survey. This is the link that you will send to your participants at the end of every session so that they can take and give you feedback on that particular session. And then the final box is the Google Sheet where you can find the participant responses, the Google Sheet with all of the data that you're going to put into REDCap and examine for your own improvement purposes. So for now, we've already loaded our Excel sheets. So let's look at our demographic one. So we see it looks like we had a session with 2 new participants who started for the first time. So we had them complete the demographics at the beginning of the session. And you can see that we gave them their participant IDs. So they used the drop down and they correctly selected 2001 and 2002 as you instructed them via the chat. Now we're going into here and we're saying, okay, the group this participant is enrolled with is, I don't remember the group number. Sure, let's say E01. And both of them are in this group. They're only in E01. And participant 2001, they are not receiving any other services from my app. So we would put in either an NA or we put in a 3, which means the not applicable. The participant 2002, on the other hand, is receiving both supplemental services and case management from my app. So they would get a 1, 2. All right. And then at the end of the session, we had people complete the participant survey. So we can pull up that Google Sheet as well. So you see we have, if we look, so it looks like only participant 2001 completed the first session's post survey. So 2002 must have either not attended the first session or did not complete the post form at that time. So for both of these, we can go in and enter, which group was the session held with? Well, we know they're both in the E01, so we can enter that in. Great. So now we are ready to open REDCap. So we will need to add a new record for these participants. So first, we'll start a new record and we'll start with the demographics form. So we'll click into that form. And now we'll have to have REDCap side by side with our Google Excel sheet so we can transfer the data. We'll want to make sure we're in the demographics sheet. That's a critical piece so we don't accidentally try to enter the wrong data. So our first participant ID is going to be in column E right there. Yes, so it'll be 2001 will be our first participant ID. And we are at Eaton, so we will click that. So far we know that this participant is only in one group. So we can select that, and then we will put their group number. Now, in order to find the date the form was filled out, we go to the timestamp. We say, okay, it was completed on 7/14. And that participant is involved with neither supplemental services or case management. So we'll click the NA for not applicable. Now we will just scroll across this row and enter each of the data points. So how old are you? 16. What is your race or ethnicity? Hispanic or Latinx or Spanish, and white. And we can continue that as, you know, for the whole form, but then when we get to the bottom, we want to save it. We'll mark it complete, and then we'll save it and exit. And then we'll go to our Google Sheet, and we will mark the date that we entered the form here. So we'll 7/14, we were really on the ball. And now we'll want to select that row, and we'll either want to cross it out or make it gray or another color. We'll do both. So that's how you would enter participant demographic information. We won't go through it for participant 202, but it would be the same process. So now let's go to the next Google Excel sheet, which is the survey. So this is, let's enter the first line we have here, which will look at the session number. Oh, and we see it's for participant 2001. So we're going to find that session number under that participant. Very good, and we'll click into it there. So we'll say, with which group was this session held? We can see in our Excel sheet, it was EO1. And yes, this participant did attend this session, and they completed a post-test. So now that populates. And here, you know, we might, if there was, let's scroll all the way to the end. If there's any data that we, in the Excel sheet. And if there's any data that we can't see, for example, in column M, we might want to highlight those cells, just click and drag over them, and then do that wrapping text option. So if you click the little arrow button next to it, there you go. And then we'll be able to see the whole line. A nice trick to do for the wrap text is, you see how there's still other problems, other cells where it's running over and you can't see the whole thing. If you click the very, very top left corner cell right there, it selects all of the cells in the whole sheet. And then you can go up to the wrap text again, select wrap, and then it will do that for the whole sheet. So you'll be able to see everything. Nice little trick. Okay, so we are ready to transfer our responses over into REDCap. So you can see the first question is, after completing today's session, I am more confident in my skills as a parent. They say somewhat more, so we click that. The second question, you know, I know more about how to communicate. They say a little more. We'd say a little more. So we would continue doing that and entering and then saving it in REDCap. After we mark it complete. And then we have 2 completed forms. We'll go back to our Google Excel sheet, and we will enter that we entered this data on 7/14. And then we will mark the row completed by either crossing it out, making it gray, or both. So next time, let's say we get interrupted in our data entry. Next time we'll be able to say, oh, I needed to continue with that. I need to get that information into REDCap so it's up to date for my supervisor. You will be able to go back and say, oh, I can pick up right at 2001's session 2. In the event that you have, you know, someone accidentally restarts the survey and there's, you know, there's 2 data entries for the same session with the same ID, that would be a circumstance in which you could call MPHI to help you sort of differentiate between which one you should use. But we're always here to help. So that ends our run through. We can go back to the PowerPoint. So we would just challenge you at this point to think through, what are your plans for entering data? Do you plan to, as we would suggest, do it immediately following your session? This might be a good idea if you are, you might want to see what young men got out of it. Did you hit the outcomes that you were hoping to? In those boxes where they have the open-ended responses, do they have any suggestions for what you might do differently? This is, uncharted territory for many of us in trying to run groups in a meaningful way virtually. So I'm sure they'll have a lot of great feedback. Even around the technology, if not other pieces. So we do encourage you to at least review the data in your Google Excel sheets after each session, so you can be learning from what the young men have to say in real time. And if possible, to be entering the data from the Excel sheet into REDCap as quickly as possible, so that you don't get into a situation where you realize 5 sessions in, the young men haven't been completing their surveys, in which case we would want you to sort of intervene with them and request that they do, and remind them of the importance and the impact of that feedback, for not only for you, but for the broader program. So we're kind of hoping and leaning on you to be our data quality check as one of your responsibilities as the local implementers. So that's all that we have for you today. On the next slide, we have Erin Edgerton's email address. She, as always, is our technical assistance contact. So please do not hesitate to reach out to her. Again, please do not include any identifiable information about participants in email. If you have questions about a specific participant, you can contact her via REDCap Messenger. But we're always here to help, and feel free to send us questions. With that, I'm going to stop our training for today, and thank you so much for your time.